the Joe Rogan Experience.
He had done it for such an important reason as well, which was to say, we in Germany should have the right to be rude about Erdogan, particularly Erdogan, who, was promoted from mayor to prime minister, now to president, wants to be sultan. He's a very bad man, locked up more journalists per capita, I think, than any other country in the world, other than China, which I don't think we can get the stats on. A very, very evil, I think, man who has led his country backwards in the last 20 years and is in the process of trying to destroy a wonderful country. And if you can't be rude about him, if you can't pretend that he sleeps with animals, which is what the German comedian started with, then somewhere down the line you won't be able to say anything about the imprisoned journalists either, and so on. And since also, by the way, people don't seem to spend much time worrying about the Turkish journalists that Erdogan imprisons, the least they paid attention when I said that he and Angela Merkel got up to really filthy acts in the zoo.
Well, obviously, the worst case of retaliation for humor is probably Charlie Hebdo, right? I mean, which is a terrible, and unfortunately, many people weren't defending the murder, but were talking the murderers. I mean, I think how many? I think it was 11 people were murdered.
Yeah, and a policeman.
And a police officer. But they were saying that instead of concentrating on the murder, which was done completely out of this reinforcing their rules of their ideology and retaliation for any mocking of that ideology. Instead of that, they were talking about how racist Charlie Hebdo was.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. In fact, my friend Jamie Kilstein was a part of that.
Right.
He was on television back in his super social justice warrior days talking about that.
Don't you wish, among other things, that people said, no, I'm not talking about something if they don't know about it?
Yeah.
My guess was that until the murders, I mean, an infinitely small number of people knew about Charlie Hebdo outside of France.
Right.
I found myself in the wake of that in studios with people who I know had just Googled Charlie Hebdo the day before. I know that they'd just gone to Wikipedia and read an English version of a claim about what that magazine was about. It goes back to that thing about my point about the journalist and the Holocaust denial thing, that just root around. A bunch of people have been killed. This doesn't seem to vindicate my side's ideology. Therefore, let me find what I can do to defame them. And oh, good, somebody at Charlie Hebdo once did this cartoon that was off color, and I can't understand what the words are beneath it, but I'll claim it's racist. I mean, people were actually doing that.
Yeah.
There was one cartoon that was used against Charlie Hebdo after the massacre that was a joke against the Front National and the claims they were making about a black woman in the Sarkozy government. But because the joke and if you didn't speak French, it wasn't clear, apparently. And if you knew nothing about recent French history, you knew nothing about the Sarkozy administration and the minister in question, these people just went to it and said, racist cartoon, not noticing that the cartoon was actually a joke about racists. But they didn't bother to find that out. And I thought that whole thing, among many, many other things, was deeply worrying from that point of view, because it means that in the immediate aftermath of something that should be so damn clear, a bunch of people can just try to reframe the narrative.
Yeah.
And change the history of a publication.
Yeah.
Claim it is just something different. And for a lot of people, of course, that was very convenient, because after all, if Charlie Hebdo's staff actually were these racists, then you didn't need to worry too much about them or why you'd been silent on the issues they'd spoken up about.
Yeah, the narrative had then been that these people had been mocking this disenfranchised, marginalized group in society, and that they had it coming.
Yeah.
In some very strange way. And it's, boy, part of me struggled with that, because I was like, is this some people just have contrarian instincts. Everybody's going left.
Sure.
They just go, well, I don't like it, and they want
Right.
to go the other way. There's so many people that have that instinct. And then there's, as you said before, this headline mentality. They read the headline and don't look any further into it, even if it's a headline about a headline.
Right.
That's all they need. They're armed with enough facts. They slam their laptop down and start debating.
Yeah, and in that case, as in many others, totally lose sight of the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters in that case being, is it ever right to make apologies for people walking into an office and gunning down people for an opinion you don't like? The answer to which has to be, of course, no.
Has to be.
Has to be no.
Yes.
And yet, in these moments, so we had one 20 years before with the Rushdie affair, the Satanic Verses affair. In these moments, you discover that you don't have the allies on your side you thought you did. In the wake of the Rushdie affair in '89, it was people from the right and the left in Britain who started making excuses for the Ayatollah. You know, we had the chief rabbi then of the UK, Jacobowitz, to his shame, said both Mr. Rushdie and the Ayatollah have offended people's feelings, as if Salman Rushdie had called on all novelists to go to Tehran and assassinate the Ayatollah if they had a chance. You had somebody like a right-wing conservative minister, Geoffrey Howe, who said that Rushdie had really offended Britain. He'd been rude about Britain, as if that had anything to do with anything. There was one famous case of a conservative peer who said about Rushdie that it wouldn't bother him if a group of young Muslims took Mr. Rushdie into an alleyway and taught him some manners. And you had that from the left as well. Bernie Grant, a Labour MP, famously said at that point that burning books wasn't a problem for him. And that was when they were burning the Satanic Verses in Bradford.
Yeah.
So you get these weird coalitions of people who suddenly turn out not to get the point, not want to defend. And then, of course, you get the cowards who say things like, well, it wasn't my sort of novel. You know, I didn't think the novel was all that good. I Midnight's Children I could cope with, but the Satanic Verses, he lost me with a plot. As if that means that then you can call for the death of the author rather than just give it a bad review.
How is he now? Is Salman Rushdie still in hiding? I know he does a lot of interviews now, and it seems to be more relaxed.
Yes, he seems to be. I don't know the specifics. There was an assurance, I think, given some years ago in the Labour government that with Tehran that they would not actively encourage the murder of Rushdie anymore.
How nice.
How nice of them. That's a freezing of relations, or unfreezing of relations. But you know, the point I wanted to make was that's again we've been through these things. We know how it plays out. With the Charlie Hebdo events, and the murder of the staff and the contributors to that magazine, we knew in the immediate aftermath what was going on, and that there were people who just wanted to make excuses, and you still hear that everywhere. I mean, I've heard it on every single free speech debate in my adult life. I remember the Rushdie debate when I was growing up, and I remember in every one of the things in recent years, from the Danish cartoons to the Jewel Medina scandal, where a publisher in London was firebombed for publishing a novel that was actually amazingly fawning about Muhammad, to Charlie Hebdo, and since you just get this strange group of people from right and left, some believers, some non-believers, who always just come up with these bullshit arguments and say things like, well, I didn't find the cartoon very funny, or I never took that magazine seriously, or I didn't think it was right when they did this. And they just don't, for some reason, have the fortitude to just say the only thing that matters in the wake of that, which is no.
Do you think that's because Islam is unique in their approach to anything that goes outside the lines of what they feel is
absolutely
acceptable? I mean, in terms of like, they will murder you if you draw Muhammad.
Yeah, this is what's been described as the internalization of the fatwa. If I'm sure you've had this experience, but it's actually worse now. The presumption is worse than the actual reality. I have quite often people saying to me, "No, I'd like to write this piece about X, but I don't know if I can because I might get a death sentence." And actually, I always say, "What are you talking about? Write it." Fortunately, so far, I haven't given that advice, and the person's then been in any way under any actual danger, let alone being killed.
Right.
And I think I might feel differently if that was the case. But there is an overcompensation occurring at the moment, and it goes far within the boundaries of what actually could plausibly get you into any trouble, whether or not the trouble is legitimate to get into or not. So that now, I've had many journalists in recent years, particularly since Charlie Hebdo, sort of sidle up to me and say, "Well, I'd quite like to do this, but I don't dare." And I'm talking about for like very basic reporting and things. They're not people saying, "Hey, I've decided to draw a great big cartoon of Muhammad with a great big dick and having sex with the Pope or something." It's not that. It's never that. It's never people saying, "I'm really just so keen to draw Muhammad today, Douglas. What should I do?" It never is that. It's always something way, way, way down. I'm thinking of even like saying something critical of certain regimes. So the internalization of the fatwa since 1989, which has been exacerbated now by the killings at Charlie Hebdo and elsewhere, and the attacks on the Jyllands-Posten in Denmark, means that we are in this period where people are really hyper sensitive, and they really shouldn't be, because it really isn't that bad. It's not as bad as they think. But this is, you can do so much work if you say to people, "I've got Kalashnikovs on my side." I mean, the extent, and people in free societies like ours are really, really loath to admit this, but it's the classic sort of mob trick, knocking on someone's door. "I'm very disappointed in you, but my friend here, my huge friend, is really angry, and I'm just holding him back." You can do an amazing amount of work if you're willing to pull that kind of trick. And if you can persuade people, and it's actually the case that there are people you're holding back, you can make enormous inroads like that.
Well, especially when there's actual evidence that people have been murdered and have been...
Absolutely.
One of the more fascinating things about Charlie Hebdo to me was the refusal of any of the mainstream media to show any of the cartoons.
Yes.
You had to go online. And I felt like this was they gave up the reins of information to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a real transitionary moment in our culture.
Yes, everyone went online to see what they...
Yeah.
Apart
it's the only place to go.
Apart from your parents, they were still under the impression that these must be, incredibly pornographic cartoons that were really, really viciously attacking somebody. But no, anyone young could find this out for themselves. And you're right, they gave up the space to the net, and they all had, again, these sort of rubbishy arguments of their own about it. I tried in Britain to get the press to do it at one go, a couple of days after the massacre, and got pretty close. That if everyone, sort of I am Spartacus tactic, if everyone did it at once, then it would be okay, or it would make it easier. And the argument you always get about that is, and it's a very persuasive argument, is that the editor of the magazine or newspaper might get protection and so on. But, a girl from the typing pool sort of thing. And which is what happened actually in some of the Satanic Verses killings and stabbings and things. It's like the Norwegian translators, Japanese translators. It's people who under no security protocol could possibly end up all getting protected. And on the basis of fearing that, the boss almost always says no.